Consider the following argument. Premise: Neela is a dog. Conclusion: Neela is a mammal. You may believe that conclusion to be true. However, based only on that premise, the conclusion does not logically follow. If you are having trouble seeing this, consider the argument's form as follows. Premise: X is a Y. Conclusion: X is a Z. Now it seems obvious that the conclusion does not logically follow, but yet, you would probably still believe the conclusion to be true. Why is that? Well, you may not be aware of it, but you are mentally inserting another premise into this argument to make the conclusion logically follow. That premise being, all dogs are mammals. With this premise, the argument would look like this. Assumed premise: all dogs are mammals. Premise: Neela is a dog. Conclusion: Neela is a mammal. And the new argument's form would look like this. Assumed premise: all Y's are Z's. Premise: X is a Y. Conclusion: X is a Z. Now the argument appears to be good. All we had to do was spell out the assumed premise. Now, you may be wondering, what point am I trying to make here? In everyday conversations, people tend to make assumptions that they would expect others to accept as well. This is so that they don't have to spend time discussing things from the very beginning, and instead can pursue a conversation based on already held ideas. Similarly, often when someone presents an argument for a claim, they don't always explicitly state all of their premises. In other words, some arguments contain implicit premises or unstated assumptions that are left out but are intended to help make the conclusion logically follow. For those curious, a technical name for an argument like this is an enthymeme. While this can make presenting arguments easier, this can be problematic because the person whom the argument is being directed towards may not already accept the implicit premises as true. In other words, what may appear obviously true to the person presenting the argument may not appear obviously true to others. I will demonstrate this in the following example. Consider the following argument. Premise: this person says some dogs are not mammals. Conclusion: some dogs are not mammals. In this argument, the conclusion doesn't logically follow. However, if I were to insert as a premise, if this person says something, then it is true, now the conclusion would logically follow. Although, you may wonder, would a lot of people accept the assumed premise as true? Again, what may appear obviously true to the person presenting the argument may not appear obviously true to others. Not to mention, it could actually be false. In situations like these, a wise thing to do is to apply the principle of charity to their argument and see if you can figure out the implicit premises that support their conclusion. The principle of charity is where one tries to accurately understand a person's argument in the best version of it, that is to say, most reasonable version of it. An application of this principle is sometimes referred to as steelmanning. This can show to the other person that you care about what it is that they are saying, and helping them realize that not everyone may accept their assumed premises as true. It may also help them rethink the assumed premises as well. Plus, wouldn't you want them to do the same thing to you if the roles were reversed? Not to mention, you are more likely to discover whether their conclusion is true by actively seeking out the best version of an argument for their conclusion. Why is that important? Well, it's because I believe that we should ultimately care about what is true and not what we want to believe or what we like to believe. By following the principle of charity, we are more likely to end up discovering what's true, even if that requires modifying some of our beliefs, than if we're just going to stick to our own beliefs and try to be as uncharitable as possible in interpreting other people's arguments. Put another way, if your goal is to figure out what is true, don't focus so much on who is right. Instead, focus on getting it right. Given that, I would like to give a word of caution about the principle of charity. While applying the principle of charity is a wise thing to do, one issue that may come up when you are doing this is that the person's argument for a claim isn't good, but you are aware of an argument for that claim that is good, but completely different than how they are arguing for it. What do you do? Well, I would recommend first trying to accurately understand the person's argument in the best version of it, and then communicating to them the other argument for that claim that you are aware of. They might even appreciate you for doing this. Not only are you allowing the person to feel heard, but you are also helping both of you by focusing on getting it right. Now, for a really problematic example, consider this. What if someone just asserts a claim as true but provides no premises in support of it? This would also be a situation where you want to apply the principle of charity to their claim and see if you can figure out what their argument is. If you aren't able to figure out what their argument is, kindly ask them for more information. If they refuse, then I would recommend looking into the claim yourself to see if there is any good evidence to back it up. If it turns out there isn't, then I would say to withhold judgment on the claim. Now, what if it later turns out that they are correct? Does that mean that they knew it all along? Or did they just get lucky? Not to mention, if it turned out they were wrong, would they admit it, or would they try to pretend they never said that, hoping that people will forget that they even said it in the first place? Remember, being correct doesn't always mean that the person was being rational. A person can be correct for a reason that isn't good. In that situation, I would kindly remind them that the person making a claim typically bears the burden of proof and must provide evidence to establish the claim's truth. In other words, they should not be going around essentially saying, "I'm right until someone else proves me wrong." Think about how many claims would be considered true if the only basis for believing in them is that nobody's proved them false. Given all of this, when would it be okay to omit a premise in an argument? This isn't an exhaustive list, but here are some good guidelines to look at when deciding whether to omit a premise in an argument. 1. The premise is uncontroversial. 2. The premise is obvious to both the person being presented with the argument and yourself. The latter is important because you should be aware of any assumptions you are making because they may actually be false and you may not be aware of that. With that all said, when in doubt, spell it out. The take-home message is this. You should evaluate an argument only after the argument has been reconstructed to include any implicit or assumed premises. These are premises that do not appear explicitly, but are intended by the arguer to help make the conclusion logically follow. Do your best to make the implicit premises be plausible ones. Also, remember to apply the principle of charity as you do this, but don't overlook significant errors. That would be a sign that the argument is fallacious. With that all said, watch out for assumptions, and remember, too, take care and think critically.